From newspaper owners to columnists and presenters, most people in the British media are quite right-wing. Connected to that is the fact that many of them also pathologically hate socialist ideas and politicians. Again, hardly a revelation. But what is increasingly clear is that much of the British media, people who pride themselves on their intelligence and pluralism, effectively want a one-party state. They will only accept a Labour Party which is impossible to distinguish from the Conservatives. Here's Janan Ganesh. He writes for the Financial Times and is the former biographer of George Osborne. His advice to Keir Starmer? So not just purge the hard left, but purge the soft left too. He writes, "The problem now isn't the few and dispossessed Leninists, it is the MPs who voted under no psychotropic influence for Ed Miliband as leader in 2010. It is the campaigners for things. Given the cost of living crisis, rising energy bills, and the fact our infrastructure is falling to pieces, this reads like a sick joke. And given the fact the guy who beat Miliband in 2015, David Cameron, had to resign a year later after losing the Brexit referendum, makes it even worse. We often talk about Martin Lewis on this show. He's a campaigner and is literally the most trusted man in Britain. Does Janan Ganesh think people like that, like Martin Lewis, who are actually respected, liked, and listened to, does he think they shouldn't be in politics? Really? Then who should? Just stupid, unpopular people? But it doesn't end there. Apparently, Labour won't be credible until it drops its position on removing charitable status from private schools. Ganesh writes, "The same is true of ending the charitable tax status for private schools. It is a question of permission and bona fides." Don't know what that means. It is a question of what the cops in Britain call your previous. Blair understood politics in those lateral terms. Starmer is a literalist. If he is to fulfill Labour's historic role of giving the Tories a breather after a long stint in office, he has to upset the soft left, he has to upset himself. This is an extraordinary thing to write, all the more since the Tories have done so much damage to the country since 2010. On every measure, they've been a disaster. And that's before the fact we're about to enter another recession, which is set to last as long as 2008. Between 2007 and 2018, average disposable incomes adjusted for purchasing power fell by 2% in the UK. Meanwhile, in France, they increased by 34%, and in Germany, by 27%. As a country, we've become poorer and weaker. And yet the best we can hope for is a Labour government that can give the Tories a rest. So presumably the Tories can come back and just do it all over again? Do we just get poorer forever, Janan?
For the kind of liberal establishment in the media who have always ostensibly said, that they're anti-Tory and they want a Labour government to be in power, over the past few years, I just found myself repeatedly wondering, why do you want a Labour Party in power? Because all of the reasons why I might ostensibly have at one point wanted a Labour Party in power, or, when you look at the founding principles of the Labour Party and all of this, you seem to have a problem with every single one of those things. So and given that you essentially want Labour to be like the Tories, but with a tiny little bit less edge, I'm just I just don't understand what you actually want to get out of a Labour government, because I feel like a lot of the things that actually happened in even under Blair, things like Sure Start centres, which the Labour right often like to talk of as, the reason why we need to get a Labour Party in government, even if they're basically as right-wing as the Tories, because they'll give us Sure Start centres. They would probably consider that policy, of socialised childcare essentially to be not even soft left, but radical left. So I'm not really sure what it is they want the Labour Party to actually do, or why they want the Labour Party to even be in power. And that really begs the question of, to these people, what is the Labour Party for? Is it to expand the imagination of what is possible when it is in opposition, and then when it's in government, to actually put that expansion of imagination into practice? When it's in opposition, is it to hold the government accountable on a fundamental ideological level? Is it to work with organised labour to build a powerful front against the worst excesses of neoliberalism? Is it to do everything it can to make sure and to push for the building of a social safety net that actually supports people? To me, I'm not interested in a Labour Party that doesn't try to do that. Like, if you're not going to try and do that, I'm not interested in supporting you. But for these people, it seems to be that a Labour Party is there to essentially manage and contain and discipline any kind of dissenting or oppositional energy in this country, to restrict our imagination, to tell us that things aren't possible, that what we want is not possible, and to essentially do the work of the Tories for them. And I'll finish on this one point. Now that Corbynites have been basically all but purged from the Labour Party, and now, the target is being put on the soft left. For these people, for these establishment figures, it will never be enough. It will never, ever be enough. When Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, these same people were begging for a soft left candidate, saying, we need to be a broad church party, and a soft left candidate is a fitting compromise between the right and the left. We need, to expand. We need to be a broad church. We need to have a lot of different people represented in our party. And now that the Corbynites have been successfully purged, they're now turning their sights on the soft left. So whatever Corbyn could have done would have never been enough for them. It would have never satiated them, because for these people, there is no compromise that would work in the interests of working class people, of organized labor. The only compromise, as far as they're concerned, is that we essentially cease to exist.
Janan Ganesh, who wrote the biography of George Osborne in 2012, which obviously shows the caliber of his thinking and who he estimates in public life, he basically wants a one-party state. He wants two parties that think and do the same thing, but they just have different colours. And he is the kind of person who views himself as liberal and progressive and pluralist. Well, liberals don't tend to want one-party states. And it's actually a big sort of thing, increasingly, sadly, amongst people who define as centrist in this country, that they don't want substantial political differences between the parties. And the same people want, proportional representation and PR. You think, well, if you don't like the difference between parties, my goodness, what do you think will happen when we have 7, 8, 9, 10 parties in Parliament? We have 3 or 4 parties forming a government in a coalition.